Thank you, Meike van Ginneken. This is such an important topic, and I think that one of the most important things from my vantage point that I wish people knew about water in the context of small island developing states is that we face the challenge of too much of it and too little of it. In terms of too little, I come from a country called Dominica, and I work in Barbados and across the Caribbean region and with many other island nations in the context of the Bridgetown initiative, which focuses on the reform of the global climate and development finance architecture. Why is that important for water? Well, many of our countries lose between 40 and 60% of their piped water. That's because pipes were laid during the colonial era, in many cases decades ago, in some cases over 100 years ago. In some instances, we don't really know where those pipes are because there aren't good blueprints. But even when we can find them, what would it take to actually replace them? The pipes are often in constrained areas where you have challenges of having, to stop traffic, to dig up roads. But from a financial perspective, from a cost perspective, it's tremendous. In a small island like Barbados, with a water network of 2,500 kilometers, it would cost in excess of $1 billion to replace those mains. And if you think about it from a practical perspective, from an implementation perspective, it could easily take upward of 25 years to do that mains replacement because of the logistics of access to roads and digging them up and then replacing them over time. So where would we get that $1 billion? The money isn't just sitting there, and it's tremendously expensive for governments to borrow for that type of essentially climate adaptation in the water sector. And that's why we need more cheaper, longer term financing. Adapting to climate change is fundamentally about adapting to issues like too much water and too little water. But the affordability of that adaptation is something that we generally don't take into consideration. And the mechanisms within the international financial architecture that would allow us to borrow at the rates that are affordable and over a time frame that's acceptable are not yet in place. I think people should think differently about water in the sense that it is life-giving. It's critical to everything that we do, but it's taken for granted. We see it as a resource that we just turn our taps on and it's there. We expect it to be there. We expect it to be of high quality. But in reality, we're living in a world where so many people do not have this resource, and therefore treating it with kindness, treating it carefully, treating it as the critical element for life that it is something that we all need to do and that we need to teach our children to do. This gives me inspiration. I'm just coming from a talk to a bunch of fifth graders who were asking me about climate change. Their understanding of climate change is that there's a lot of greenhouse gas in the air, and that's causing icebergs to melt and sea levels to rise. But the reality is that it's so much more interconnected to the world than to sea level. And if you think about it in the context of water, climate change essentially leads to the challenge of too much water in some places, be that from flooding, be that from coastal erosion, be that from storms and devastation inland, not just on the coast, but inland because of rivers, but also a lack of water. Desertification in countries that are already dry, but increasingly irregular rainfall patterns that are affecting agriculture, that are affecting every single industry that we rely on, that are affecting people's ability to live a safe and dignified life. What gives me hope and inspiration in that capacity is that children as young as 5, 6, 7 are already thinking about these issues and already becoming conscious about how they treat the planet and how they treat water on the planet, how they think about what the world needs in order to be put on a sustainable path. And that's tremendously comforting, inspirational, but also exciting. What is possible with a generation that really understands what these resources are, how these assets should be treated. We're in their hands in large part, and they're beginning to think about these issues at a very early stage. The key question is, how much time do we have before some of the damage that we're seeing on the planet becomes irreversible? And in the case of water, before some parts of the world that are so dry, go beyond the point of return. I would like to pass the glass to Jennifer Sara, who's the Director for Climate Change at the World Bank. She's tremendously inspirational, both in her content knowledge, but also in her infectious energy. Jennifer, over to you.